Hello everybody. My name is Maarit Palovirta and I'm European Regional Affairs Manager at the Internet Society, so ISOC. And I'm here today to try and contribute to the discussion about the trans-Eurasian connectivity and especially the role of IXPs. And for those of you who are not maybe that aware about ISOC, so ISOC is a non-profit organization that was established in 1992. By the pioneers of the internet, so the windsurfs and Bob Kahns, etc. And the whole idea was that, you know, internet should remain an open and neutral platform for innovation, economic and social development. So very briefly, we are a global organization. We have 6 regional offices, so I'm from the European office. And we are heavily supported by our members and chapters. So, as you can see from the numbers there, we have some 65,000 members around the world and some 100 chapters. And maybe something to highlight on this slide is the chapters. So it is a kind of American term for association or a local association. And in Europe, we have about 28 chapters. And I'm also happy to say that in this region, we do have chapters in Romania, Armenia, and also we have some chapters in formation, for example, here in Azerbaijan and in Ukraine. And we, of course, hope that these chapters would be fully functional in the near future. And while I don't want to labor about this mission, because the mission statements tend to be also a bit, you know, often maybe flat, I would like to say a few things about that. So our goal is really to promote the open development, evolution, and use of the internet for the benefit of all people throughout the world. So our goal is really to try and provide access to the internet to all people in the world. And the way we try and do this is by getting engaged in the region, like here in the Caucasus area, with the development and evolution of the internet. And I would like to emphasize perhaps one word on this slide, so that is the word open. And it's become a bit of a, you know, political curse word even in the context of the internet lately, because, you know, there's a kind of in the higher echelons, if you like, of the discussion, there's a lot of discussion, so who owns the internet, should it be open, what does open really mean? And I wanted here to try and highlight that. So just a couple of weeks ago, the Internet Society, we launched a new paper on this. And I think it's useful to think about openness of the internet as a core principle and to try and divide it into different boxes. So today we are mainly going to talk about, in the context of the IXPs, the technology openness. So the fact that the internet should be based on open protocol standards, and there should be global interoperability. And also, of course, that's why we are here, because the internet is not just one big thing, but it's a federation of networks, and we try and it's in our mission to make sure that all these different networks work together, and there's a global network that we call the internet. But also then you have the other boxes here, so, you know, there's economic openness of the internet, so as to enable innovation, to enable new business models. So if you think about cloud computing, for example, you know, that's a new business model, and it exists because the internet was there as a platform to allow businesses to create IT as a service, as opposed to IT as a kind of in-house solution. Then you do have the politics part, so openness is, of course, necessary to a certain extent at this level and also at the society level. So all users should be able to use internet as a kind of medium for their society. But today we will focus on the technology part mainly. And I would like to take the discussion back to the trans-Eurasian connectivity issue. So we had a very good presentation this morning by Jim Cowie, who had taken approach, had considered the southern route, let's say, of the connectivity. Now, from ISOC perspective, we've mainly focused on the Central Asian countries and also then the Caucasus region. And as a kind of regional level, we see the main regional challenge is really the lack of international fiber infrastructure and the low levels of internet bandwidth. And especially this demonstrates itself not so much maybe in Azerbaijan, but in the Central Asian republics. And I think if the international connectivity was reinforced, the immediate impact would hit the Central Asian Republic, which would be great, but then also there would be a second positive effect impacting the countries who have already better infrastructure connectivity, and that would be Russia, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan. So increasing demand in Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan would also then improve the general connectivity in the region, and would, let's say, help to create a regional ecosystem for the internet. And the third positive point in this regard was, and this was something that I hadn't even considered myself, but I was discussing with the World Bank in this occasion, and they said that they are being contacted a lot by different sectors, such as the banking and finance sector, who have major issues with connecting Hong Kong, Shanghai, the major finance capitals in Asia, to the similar capitals in Europe. So there's not enough internet security at the moment. There are not enough alternative routes. And again, for this reason, this part of the world is very important, and that's why also we at ISOC are engaging here. On the regional efforts, so this is something that I used to do in my previous life, and hence I wanted to just highlight a few things. So there are many organizations who are working in the region to improve connectivity. And one study you may want to take a look at is the UN ESCAP fiber mapping. It's dating back to January 2013. And it provides pretty good data on the prices in the different countries and how they see this developing going forward. World Bank is involved. They're not currently planning to finance any infrastructure project, but they're providing technical assistance to many countries with their broadband plans. And the main bulk will, I believe, fall on the private sector companies. And we already heard earlier today that Turk Telecom, for example, is trying to expand internationally. Rostelecom, China Telecom, of course, are present. Telia Sonera, perhaps, as an international operator, is present. So there's a lot of people looking at the supply side of the internet in the region. Now, I come from Brussels, I'm based in Brussels, so I've also, of course, having discussions with the European Union, and they have decided to support the demand side. So they are financing projects in Central Asia for the NRENs, for example. So they have a large project they call Karen, and they've invested heavily in the network, which is apparently currently, according to them, the best network in the region. And they're planning to do a similar project starting next year in the Caucasus area, including also Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. So there is kind of demand creation as well, because these projects, they help, they develop new services, applications such as telemedicine, IPv6 as well, etc., etc. So that was more of a background. Now, what does ISOC then want to do here, and how do we get engaged? So we discussed the international connectivity here already. Many people working on it. National backbone, in other words, broadband policy, I believe, belongs to governments, and Azerbaijan, I believe, is working on the national broadband plan, and as are many others. On the internet service last mile side, well, you have various local operators there trying to deliver services to the citizens at the best possible price. And where we have kind of found our sweet spot, if you like, for engagement is the middle mile. And this is where the traffic exchange takes place. So in this rather simple graph, you see these little square boxes, red boxes, and they depict the traffic exchange points. Just maybe to say a few words about the history of ISOC and IXPs. So we have started our IXP program already a few years back. And originally it started in Africa, so we have in Africa, we're working together with the African Union to establish and launch IXPs in 16 countries. And this is already well on its way, so we have good results, and I will share some of them with you. And we are now, since then, expanding also this effort into Asia, Latin America, and Europe. So then moving on to the actual IXP, so role of internet exchange points. And maybe first it's useful to just restate what is an IXP. So IXP is simply a physical location where IP networks meet to exchange traffic. So it's a very simple idea. The idea is that when you have such a traffic exchange point in a country within borders, you avoid going abroad and using expensive international connectivity for your internet traffic. So this, of course, then brings many benefits to the country itself. And the internet exchange points are now well recognized as a vital part of the internet ecosystem and also kind of facilitating the domestic ICT sector. And I wanted to, raise this because now here you have a quote from the OECD report, but also many consultancy reports state this fact. And typically, of course, when we talk about domestic connectivity development, broadband development, the classic advice, it goes down to open access, competition, local loop unbundling, perhaps infrastructure sharing. But now IXPs actually appears on many of these lists as a kind of key component for countries to reinforce their internet infrastructure. So if we just quickly go through the points here, so the primary role is to reduce costs because traffic stays local. Also, IXPs then improve the quality of internet services because of reduced latency. And because of the reduced latency, there's a better user experience, and hence it drives up demand. And what we have, with our experience, realized that not only do the IXPs deliver these benefits, they also tend to create a kind of hub around them. So we see that, for example, data center services, many other added services tend to gather around IXPs. And of course, then these also become skills hubs because you have people working for the different infrastructures and different services, and these people meet together regularly. So it becomes actually an engine for the country in boosting the connectivity, but also then innovation, services, etc. Now, if you look at the IXPs around the world, today less than half of the countries have an IXP. And it has to be said that the IXPs that do exist, they vary greatly in size and in the capacity, if you like. So there are IXPs that have hundreds of members and hundreds of ISPs connecting through them. But then you have IXPs that have, one guy who is dealing with it part-time. And in terms of the map, if you look at the map, you still have some blank spots or near blank spots, and there's some emptiness in the middle of Africa, but also if you look at Central Asia, there aren't that many IXPs. So there's one, I believe it's in Uzbekistan, but aside from that, there aren't any, which also reflects the current stage development of the internet market in this region. And now going back to our ISOC history, just to give you a flavor what we have, for example, achieved this year. So in Africa, we have launched, to my calculations, 4 IXPs this year. So Namibia, Swaziland, Rwanda, and Gambia. And this was done with grant money, but we have been helping, ISOC has been helping the governments and the telecommunications sector to launch the IXPs. And on a global basis, we have started discussions, for example, in Papua New Guinea, and last month I attended a workshop in Georgia, in Tbilisi, to try and launch an IXP in Georgia. So, okay, I've been talking a lot about, in general, what are the IXPs, and they are good for you and they should be part of your policy. So I wanted to also bring some numbers, some quantifying, let's say, quantify the benefits for the IXPs. And I agree that maybe Kenya is not the best comparison point for this region, but it is a country where the IXP was launched a couple of years ago, so we do already have good data from the country, so I wanted to share this with you. And we already discussed, for example, the latency. So you can see in the first column, that's the situation before an IXP launch, and then you have the situation after. And latency, for example, has significantly improved. Local traffic exchange. So you see that previously Kenya was not exchanging much traffic at all locally, whereas now they've had a significant increase in that as well, and they're saving serious money. So nearly $1.5 million a year they have saved through international connectivity by simply introducing an IXP. And I would say here that, okay, It's clearly not the same situation perhaps in Azerbaijan, because I'm sure you have a lot of private peering agreements and there's already local traffic being exchanged domestically, but still we would expect some improvements in terms of cost savings also in this region. They have much more local content today. They have had some indirect impacts on e-government. They have had increase in domain names. So now instead of .com, they're using a lot of .ke. And also as a regional route. So they've managed to attract traffic as a regional hub internationally. And I think Jim Cowie this morning was also reflecting on this fact, saying that Baku, for example, could become such a regional hub due to simply its regional position and the good connectivity routes surrounding it. So all kinds of benefits that Kenya has experienced, and we would expect similar developments in this region. Now, there's no formula as such for IXP development, but at ISOC we say that it's 80% social engineering and 20% technical engineering. And this stems from the fact that building an IXP, it's not rocket science, it's a box that many engineers maybe can build. The difficult part is to bring together all the stakeholders, to convince all the ISPs, the telecommunications providers, to work together, have the government support this, and have the government work together. And this is often, a process that takes time. Technically speaking, you see that we have, we kind of work on 3 layers when it comes to building an IXP. So technically speaking, as we said, not difficult. And it can be started very modestly, let's say. So London IXP links started with 5 ISPs connecting into it, and it was done with donated equipment. So they didn't invest any money, and today they're the largest in the world, and they have 330 members connecting into that IXP. Governance, typically what we see is that not-for-profit model works the best. And this is typically a model that would be member-driven, so all the people who connect through it, other companies, organizations, they will be deciding how the IXP governance structure is run. There are other models, so you have for-profit models in the US especially. There are some models that you have an organization in the country that is, let's say, sponsoring it, and this could be an NREN, it could be the government in some cases. But what we see is that this not-for-profit voluntary model typically works best. Then you have the skills part, so we also have to train local people and make sure that it's a sustainable process. Finally, a few words on the Georgia. So it's not too far from here. I thought this might be an interesting thing to share. So we organized the workshop together with RIPE NCC, with our friend Maxim, who was there as well, here from the audience, and also the EURIX. It was strongly supported by the regulator and the Ministry of Economy. And so much so that it was in fact the government who invited all the participants to be there, so it was by invitation only workshop, but we had all the main telecommunication operators, other ISPs, data center providers, and the NREN in the room. I'm not going to go too much into details, there's not that much time left, but just wanted to raise a few key issues that were discussed there. So one issue that came up was that of competition in the telecoms market. So, like in Azerbaijan, like in many countries, they still have the incumbent operators who tend to have a dominant position in the market. And they are clearly defending their position because it is not in their interest directly, immediately, necessarily to introduce an IXP. So we had some discussions about that. And also the fact that in Georgia, the telecoms market is already quite developed, so they have private peering agreements amongst themselves. But again, these are commercial agreements, so we didn't go into details, but in many cases, I'm assuming that it's the incumbent telecommunications operator who would be benefiting from these agreements, whereas a public IXP would be everybody open access type of arrangement. And for this reason, actually, the government is strongly supporting the whole IXP idea because they are seeing that this would be a natural way to introduce more competition to the market and also lower the entry barriers to the market to new operators. Other things that were discussed is neutrality, so it should not be in a telecommunications operator's location, but rather in a neutral location like the NREN or perhaps a rented location. We discussed a lot about the value-add services, so you can build on services on top of the IXP, whether it's data hosting, whether it's voice over IP, etc., for mobile operators. And we also discussed the role of the government. So government was actually asking, so what is our role? What should we do? We don't want to regulate. Should we regulate? Do we put guidelines into place? And this was another discussion. And from our perspective, the model that works is that government is there to facilitate, to support, but regulation is typically not necessary. And then my concluding thoughts. So I named the presentation Creating an Enabling Environment for the Internet. And what we're really talking about here is how to lift the barriers to the Internet access value chain, so that lovely simple graph that you saw. How can we make sure that all the components on this graph work? And how do we make sure that at the end users get internet access, good quality, hopefully, and at a decent price? I'm not going to go through all this, but this is typically, I don't think the list brings any surprises from the kind of policy recommendation point of view, but these are typically the kind of recommendations you would see from most organizations. And ISOC fully supports these kinds of developments. And the point I simply want to raise here is that nowadays IXPs are part of this list. And we believe that they have deserved their place there, and we would be more than happy to discuss with operators, with the governments in this region to see how we could work on this further. And very finally, I put some references here for you to check out and can also provide some further information if of interest. Thank you.
Коллеги, вопросы? Доклад был достаточно насыщенный. Неужели никто ничего не хочет узнать? So,
no questions?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's what I call comprehensive description. Thank you very much.